Hi, and welcome back to my channel. I've been oh, mulling over the idea of doing producing a video about my experience in my long, adventuresome life that I've had, with many ups and downs and many adventures and many lessons to be learned. But when I was in college, I hitchhiked across Europe by myself to experience cultures, foreign cultures, and putting myself in a position of being able to be responsible for myself, and to just learn as much as I could about life. And I really did that. I wrote a book about it. It's called Across the Seas. Haven't done anything with it, but I may get it up on Amazon Kindle in the future. But what I want to tell you about today is a serious adventure that I had. And I'm going to name this video The Banana Republic Insurrection and Military Coup That I Survived. And yes, I did survive a coup, much like what our capital experienced and our lawmakers experienced last week. And I wrote a short story about this military coup that I survived. And I also made another video, and I think it was called Rain, Rain, Go Away, but it was about life in the jungle in Central America. And I lived there for 3 years during the Vietnam War. I was on an Army base. My husband was the post surgeon. And the day I arrived was a very significant date in the history of the Republic of Panama. And I wonder, does anyone know the significance of the date, October 11th, 1968? It should be remembered in history books, comparable to the date in Washington, D.C. of January 6th, 2021. So I'm going to just read this little short story, and I may talk about it at the end to see how relevant it might be to what's going on today, and how other countries in the world are much more accustomed to military coups. But wow, to have an attempted coup d'etat in the most powerful, westernized, democratic country in the world just amazes me. So, this is the story of me leaving the United States on a military flight, and the flight left Atlanta, Georgia, for Panama City on that eventful day. So this is kind of written as prose, but I'd love to hear your comments about the story, and please do that. Share the video if you find it interesting. So, Memoirs of an Army Wife, October 11th, 1968. This is the captain. We've begun our descent into Howard Air Force Base. The seatbelt sign snapped on, signaled by a familiar chime. Please take your seats. The temperature on the ground is 83 degrees, it's overcast, and the winds are calm. The tower has cleared us for landing and will be at the gate in about 7 minutes. Welcome to Panama. The monotone of the familiar words gently stirred me out of a restless sleep. Blood rushed into my tingling left hand, numb from the weight of my 5-month-old son. He slept, cradled in my arm, unaware of the tipping and turning of the giant plane as it descended into the thick soup. The light of dawn slithered into the hold of the plane, methodically turning the scene from shades of black and white to brilliant hues with details in sharp focus. As I peered out the tiny window, excitement bubbled up within me. The featureless gray sky consuming the plane didn't dampen my enthusiasm to begin this new chapter of my life. Finally, rows of dim lights outlining a single runway burst into view. Nestled in a small clearing cut into a blanket of thick dark green, the airfield stood alone. In May 1968, my husband Robert had received his orders to report to Fort Sam Houston on July 6th for a modified basic training course for medical doctors being inducted into the Army. In the middle of August, while still in Texas, he had received orders for a tour of duty at Fort Gulick Army Base in Panama, in the Panama Canal Zone. He was one of the lucky 5% of the 500 doctors drafted that year to be assigned duty other than Vietnam. When the good news came, Robert gladly extended his tour from the standard 2 years to 3 years, which allowed Bobby, my infant son, our infant son, and me to live on the base. In the middle of August, Robert, Bobby, and I drove to New Orleans after his basic training, where we said goodbye. From there, Bobby and I flew to Minneapolis to stay with my parents while we waited for base housing to become available. Robert flew directly from New Orleans to Panama. Our accompanied baggage, shipped from New Orleans, would take a week to get to Panama. The car and household goods were put in storage until we had housing. During those weeks apart, I anxiously anticipated bathing in the culture of the melting pot of local Indians, European and South American immigrants, Jamaican workers, Indian mercantile owners, Chinese garden growers, and the ever-present United States military caretakers of the Americas Robert had described to me in his letters and tapes. According to Robert, Fort Gulick Army Base lay at the northwest end of the Panama Canal, straddling the peninsula of land jutting into Lake Gatun on one side and curtained by the ever-constant creeping jungle on the other. As I faced the mystery of my future, it felt like I was standing on a cliff ready to jump, not knowing how deep the cavern was, or if I would survive. What thrilled me was the unknown. My heart pounded with excitement as I contemplated the pending transformation of my life from wife of a struggling medical student to wife of a major in the United States Army. The thump of the landing gear lowering jarred me out of my thoughts. The left wing tipped out of sight as the plane circled to reduce speed and align its sleek body with the runway. The control tower obscured the small terminal. I saw a portable staircase separate from the building as if being carried along by an army of ants marching to the beat of a silent drum. I squeezed my eyelids shut and held my breath until I felt the jolt of the landing gear searing the asphalt. My fear melted when I heard the comforting words, "Please stay in your seats until we have come to a complete stop and the captain has turned off the seatbelt sign." On the other side of the door stood a sea of tan, uniformed bodies whose faces blended into anonymity. The portal, a passage from one life to the next, alone separated me from my love. As it slowly opened, the tide of heaviness gushed through the cabin. Instantly, my hair frizzed and my clothes dampened as beads of sweat covered my body. Suddenly, I couldn't breathe. I gasped as the unfamiliar pressure forced the air from my lungs. The strange blanket of air cloaking my body distracted my attention from the gnawing sensation of anxiety pitted in my stomach. Cautiously, I descended the steep, tiny steps connecting the giant plane with the hot, steaming tarmac. I struggled with each laborious step, clutching the diaper bag and purse in one hand and my baby resting on my shoulder, supported with my other arm that ached from the dead weight. The ground slowly, painstakingly rose to meet me. As I approached the terminal, the stream of passengers pushed me along faster than I wanted to move. From the crowd, a hand reached out and touched my shoulder. "Sarah, let me help you, sweetheart." I wanted to drop everything and hug and kiss my soldier boy, but the rabble propelled me even faster through the building, crowded with soldiers searching for their wives and children. Robert took Bobby from me and mused over the innocence of his son's oblivion to his surroundings. How was the trip? How did Bobby handle it? Well, it was long. Since we left Minneapolis. The stop in Atlanta was brief, but there was no agent to help me with Bobby and no stroller as I had requested. Except for struggling to go to the bathroom while holding him, the rest was okay. Tolerable, anyway. The Army had arranged for us to spend the 2-hour layover in Charleston at a motel near the base. I tried to sleep, but I was too excited. As the crowd thinned and our pace slowed, it felt good to have someone on whom to spill my pent-up words and feelings. I continued to ramble. Bobby was good during the whole trip. He ate and slept, and I'm so glad I'm still breastfeeding. The stewardess said that sucking during takeoff and landing prevents their ears from plugging. There's less chance of inner ear pain, and it worked. He slept through most of the last flight. As we meandered through the small terminal, Robert's voice erased all the apprehension I'd had during the months we'd spent apart. Robert heaved a sigh of relief as he continued. "Well, I'm glad you're finally here. The car arrived a few days ago. I had planned to come alone to pick you up, but because of what happened last night, a driver had to bring me." As Robert spoke, a strange urgency rang in his voice. "I'll tell you all about it in the car. I've so much to tell you. By the way, did you get my last tape?" "Yes, it came a few days before I left. I can just picture our home. That gave me something concrete to think about. I can't wait to meet the couple next door. It sounds like we have a lot in common." "You'd better like them. Actually, we share a house with them. 2 officers' quarters are in each building, like a duplex. Oh, you'll see soon enough, but this other issue is more important right now." By the time we found all the baggage and went through the tedious customs procedures, I was exhausted. As we stood at the curb amidst my new set of Samsonite luggage and boxes of baby things, a dark green sedan pulled up. A man in Army fatigues jumped out, saluted Robert, and hastily threw my bags into the trunk. We quickly drove away from the airport through the clean, freshly painted military buildings, sprinkled along wide, grassy boulevards. On either side of the main gate, a barbed wire fence encompassed the military compound from what lay beyond. One side was clean, polite, and familiar. The other pained my eyes as if I'd been sprayed with pepper. The sterility of the Air Force Base contrasted so sharply with what spread out beyond the bastion that the two worlds seemed eons apart. Nothing was the same. The odor of good people struggling to exist in crowded shacks of scrap metal and cardboard pasted together, mingled with the lingering sweet fragrance of flowers and fruit trees that camouflaged their meager dwellings. The shacks were interspersed with rows of small shops and occasional open markets. I rolled the window down so I could scrutinize the openings in the fronts of the buildings. Animal heads and whole chickens hung from hooks and ropes from low ceilings. The overwhelming pungent smell mixed with the putrid stench of urine from naked children playing in the streets. Slowly I closed the window and turned to Robert. A distant gaze shadowed his face. He didn't notice my scornful look and couldn't know the nausea churning in the pit of my stomach. With a sternness I couldn't remember hearing from him before, he spoke. "Sarah, early this morning the base went on alert." He turned toward me and gently placed his arm across my shoulders. With a sense of urgency, he continued, "That means a lot of things are happening, but what's most important is that we get back to base quickly and without incident." A lump caught in my throat. "Robert, why the alert? What happened?" He knew I wouldn't let him brush me off. "Well," hesitantly he began, "there's been a military coup d'etat in the Republic. The president of Panama, Dr. Arnulfo Arias, has been overthrown from power, and the commander of the National Guard, General Omar Torrijos, has taken over the government. We were briefed at 0300 this morning. I don't know all the details yet, but I sense there's a degree of secrecy shrouding the whole affair. It's like a state of emergency will be declared soon. The nausea in my stomach almost belched forth. Perspiration spewed from every pore. I wanted to close my eyes, click my heels, and be back in Minnesota. Although I'd always yearned to experience new people and new places and to learn about my world, I found myself caught in a web of intrigue, espionage, and adventure beyond my wildest imagination. I wanted to learn about this foreign country, its history, its culture, and its people. Now the reality of the new world oozed from my mind, just as sweat oozed from my pores. I continued to pressure him. Robert, how does that affect us? Well, we need to get back to the base while the roads are still open. Then we'll be safe. I'm certain the base will be quarantined within hours. There's a good possibility that all military dependents living in the Republic will be evacuated back to the States. We may need to house some of them to stay with us temporarily until they're sent home. There's likely to be an uprising among the Panamanian people, especially the students. It's potentially an extremely volatile situation. There have been similar coups in the past that were not without bloodshed and violence. Thank God you slipped in before the whole country is at war. Or maybe it would have been better if you were still in the States. At least I would know then you were safe. Now, I don't know what's going to happen. Robert sat quietly, motionless. The crease between his brows deepened. Passion laced with fear jumbled my thoughts. We drove down the narrow, cluttered streets, the tiny windows of the military car obscuring a clear view of the blurred scenes passing by. An occasional figure resembling Fidel Castro stood sentry. Each was garbed in mottled green camouflage uniforms and with a small flat military hat. Each stiffly postured soldier with piercing eyes glued to an invisible enemy held a machine gun with a bayonet attached, seemingly prepared to thrust. I broke the silence. Robert, are those American soldiers? No, sweetheart. We're in the Republic now. Those are Panamanian military police. Here the military and the police are one and the same. Are they protecting us? Well, not exactly. Right now, I'm not sure if we're considered the enemy. We supported the previous government regime, but I don't know if the U.S. is aligned with the new junta. Robert's distant gaze masked his inner turmoil. I sat looking out the window at the scenes of my new life whizzing by, waiting to paste the puzzle pieces together. Beyond the police sentinels, I saw the narrow streets of Panama City, littered with wanton poverty like I'd never seen before. Children had babies strapped to their backs. Women were laden with baskets precariously balanced on their heads, some filled with clothing, some with fruit. Old men walked wearily, wooden poles perched on their drooping shoulders, with huge, colorful ceramic jugs dangling from the ends. As the car slowed to allow passage of people, children rushed to the windows, their saddened eyes puncturing my heart, their pitiful faces pleading for their mercy. Excuse me. They extended their dirty little hands with fists clenched as if cradling treasures. They chanted, "Chicles, chicles." Robert, what do they want? They're selling chewing gum. Can we give them money? I can't explain now, honey, but we're advised not to give them money. Why? Who would deny these innocent babies a few pennies? Then beyond, I saw the endless line of children, their mothers sitting in doorways behind them, wrapped in drab, tattered cloth, barely resembling clothing. I wondered how long they'd been sitting in their arched shelters. Perhaps they lived in the doorways. Tears filled my eyes. Passion filled my heart. I turned away. The cool, dry air from the air conditioner protected me from what the world felt outside. The tightly closed windows separated me from the sounds of the street, but the plaguing scene penetrated the glass. I was compelled to look back. A sudden torrent of rain burst from the heavy clouds, obscuring my view from the window as the endless line of children's faces fading into a lay of flowers. We left the narrow streets and meandering marketplaces and entered a dense rain forest with its mantle of tree branches arching to grasp each other high above the winding road. Only the patter of constant raindrops interrupted the settling silence. The forest was a brief interlude between the bustle of the city and the quiet, creeping jungle. The car raced and slowed, as the driver navigated the curves and potholes. The rain stopped as quickly as it had begun, allowing the lingering fresh scent of the wet jungle to seep into the car. As the clouds disappeared, the green camouflage of the land contrasted against the backdrop of the emerging cobalt blue sky. Was I leafing through a National Geographic, looking at the photos of thatched roof houses perched on stilts, the modest structures enveloped with banana palms and umbrella plants were within reach of my mind and soul. The people I saw stared blankly back at me as if they, too, were etched permanently on the pages of the magazine. "Are you hungry, Sarah? Sarah?" Robert's voice suspended my illusion. "I'm sorry, Robert, I didn't hear you. I'm in a daze. It just doesn't seem real." "That's okay. I know you've had a long day and night. Don't try to take it all in at once. You'll have lots of time." The jungle passed by, its impenetrable vines and branches threatening to entangle the road, the car, and me. Well, I want to thank you for watching and listening to this heartfelt story. And I want you all to know that our country is worth protecting. Our democracy is worth protecting. We don't want to succumb to the throes of emotion and a divergence of political views. We want to unite and be a country that we're proud of. We're proud to be citizens of, and we're proud of our government and our politicians, who we must believe have our best interests at mind, in their minds, and to protect us from whatever terrorism, acts of terrorism, insurrection, and any other threat to our democracy that might undermine our peace of mind, our welfare, and our future. And thank you again. I love you all. Be safe.